I don't know how long I've known you, John, but it's like forever. I think 30 years now. Is it really 30 years? I started my business in 2000, my real business in 2000, and that was the first time I met you. But I want to go a little bit further back than that. Because I really don't know John Morgan. You know what it's like when you finally get to meet someone and then you build up a relationship with them, but you don't know what their past life was about. What was it like? What's your earliest memory of John Morgan? And no, even further back, this is my ADD kicking in. Even further back, Jonathan Aloysius Morgan. What's your middle name?
Jam, yeah.
Jam. What's your middle name?
Frank. Named after my grandfather, Francis. So I was Jonathan Frank Morgan, but I abbreviated it to John just for convenience.
Just a J-O-N. Does anyone ever get your name wrong? Like, do they go, hey,
always.
Jonathan?
Always.
Really?
Someone asked me, I had a suicide prevention meeting the other day, and they go, is that John French or something? And I went, no, it's just an abbreviation for Jonathan.
Jonathan. It's simple.
So earliest memory, one of my favourite memories was where my grade 1 teacher, Mrs. Lennon, wouldn't allow me to go to the toilet. So I peed my pants.
Right.
And I watched the urine going down, you know, with those bolted desks that were bolted in with metal?
No. Yeah.
And I watched it go down the side, and I actually found it okay. I found it quite interesting to watch that happen. But then
to watch yourself pee?
To watch it go through my pants down, down the back. And that I do remember that. It
How
was
old?
a bit of a trauma memory. So that was I was grade 1.
Yeah.
So 5. I don't have great recollections. I've got lots of snippets. I had a great childhood. So I remember my gran who lived with us. I remember mum and dad and my sisters. I remember we had lots of space as a youngster.
What was it like growing up in the Morgan family? Talk to me about your father.
Yeah, so Dad was an extraordinary guy. He was amazing. He was quite neglected as a kid, despite the fact that I think his mum's family, were reasonably well off. They just were the ultimate parents that were completely hands off. But despite that, Dad was the most caring, dedicated husband, father. Extraordinary man. And when I interviewed him just before he died, just before his, this was going back a few years now, and he had dementia and he had Parkinson's, so he could barely get the words out. But I said, what are the two most important things in your life, Dad? And he said, love and love of family, and he said community. And by community service, because he was in Rotary 60 years and did lots of stuff. Yeah.
Would you consider him a mentor?
Absolutely. Okay. Great human being. I don't think there was anybody I admired more than my dad. Extraordinary guy.
Yeah. Now your mum's still alive?
Mum's still alive. She's an amazing person too.
Okay. How old is she now?
She's, in a couple of weeks, she turns 88.
Wow.
And still living in a home, lots of care sort of wrapped around, only sort of going downhill probably the last year, but doing really well. But the real practical, pragmatic one, that you got things done and made it happen and so forth. Her language of love was service. So, when our youngest was born, she turns up with 10 meals that she's cooked so that we can get through that.
So you got a sister?
I've got two
Two
sisters.
sisters? Yeah. Yep. Talk to me about them.
Two sisters. I've got my eldest sister, Oni. She lived in Bundaberg for many years, and recently has gone down closer to Brisbane to live. She's got a beautiful daughter, Tali, who's married with two absolutely gorgeous kids. So they're loving grandchildren. Had a tragedy going back 8 or 9 years ago. When her son, who was her second, died by suicide, and that was Marcus, and that's how Marcus' mission started, to try and think about how do we address the issue of suicide for men when we don't, share our feelings about how we're doing. And I've got a middle sister, Shell, who's just built a house with her partner of many years, Damien, and lives up at Puna and has got kids and grandkids.
I want to get back to Marcus Mission in a little while.
Sure.
But firstly, I want to stay with you because I'm finding all this interesting because although I know John Morgan, who the John Morgan it is that I sit with here and we've had a lot of fun together, you have 2 kids and a wife. Talk to me about who they are, what their names are, and
so I've been extraordinarily lucky. As we say at Marcus Mission, had a practice marriage, a youthful marriage. We met at uni and got divorced and went through, quite a few years of significant loss. So I had a very good mate that died by suicide, unfortunately, in front of me. I had a very good mate that died of leukemia. 6'6" builder, at a very young age in his late 20s, and I had a failed marriage. So it was a pretty shitty few years, but I met this extraordinary woman who was introduced from a mutual friend, Simone, and we've been together ever since. So more than I don't know, 26 years or whatever else, and we've had a fantastic life.
And 2 beautiful children.
And 2 amazing children.
Amazing. Right? I've met them. I met them when they were like this big and doing some crazy stuff with them, with listening to the noise and the ruckus that happens in your family.
Yeah.
Which enlightens me every time I go over there, and I don't know. I just get this sense that what you see with John on the outside is what you see with John around the family. It's just that it never changes. So you know how some people bring their work face to work, and they bring their home face to home? You just have one face.
Yeah, I think the older that you get, and probably the more you don't give a shit, that the more authentic you become. But coming back to Josh and coming back to Maddie, my 2 children, besides Simone, they are the most joy I've ever had in life, and I'd much rather be called, a good dad than a good facilitator, if you like. But they are extraordinary kids, and they're kind, and they're beautiful, and they're generous, and that's all we want for them. They're just wonderful people. And funnily enough, this Saturday we're going on a big family holiday with Josh and his beautiful wife Jade and Madeline and her great partner Casey. We're going on a holiday together, and I can't wait. And that's absolutely joyous. So we have a really close relationship, even though they're adults. We just adore them.
It's interesting, when I first met you 30 years ago, my initial impression of you, John, was you wore a iron shirt, you had a tie, and you had a suit jacket on. And I thought, I'm out of my league here. I'm talking to a person who is smart. No, seriously, I'm talking to a person who is way above my pay grade here. He is smart. Were you smart at school?
That's such a great question. This is the absolute truth of this story.
I love this.
When I was in grade 5, I was doing so bad at school. Like, I just couldn't, for instance, maths, I just couldn't do. And my darling mum, took me aside and talked about, practical love, torturous love, an hour of maths every day for a whole year. That's what we did. And the great thing was I did maths 1 and 2 in senior, and I did fine with it. But at the time, she was really worried that I wasn't doing well at school. So they took me to this sort of special testing centre, and they said, your son's this conceptual learner. And I'm going, wow, conceptual, because these days when we talk about it in leadership workshops, conceptual means, big picture, problem solving, decision making, great time managers.
Yeah.
In those days it meant slow. So basically they were telling me, your son's really a slow learner. But once I got it, I was good. So I reckon I'm one of those people where the early part of school was really hard. I had to grind away, even in senior, just head down, bum up, and both parents hard workers, so great role models. But I found I've got a couple of degrees from uni, a master's degree, and an undergrad, and I found that quite okay. I did quite well with it. but I was a conceptual learner. I was slow.
You're slow.
I found it really hard. So I love telling that story in leadership workshops.
Not much has changed. Anyway, so I want to move quickly. I want to move to, I guess, growing up. I look at you now, and you're this specimen of just wonder. Did you always have long hair?
Yeah, in fact, the fellas at Marcus Mission were putting shit on me the other day because I did have a book published, 2000, I think, and I had this little book of golden rules, and I had this sort of nice sort of set of hair, and within a few years I'd lost it completely. One thing I can say is that I really don't give a shit about superficial stuff like hair. I really have never had a problem with losing my hair or whatever else. Funnily enough, I reckon as an adult I grew into my own skin. I think I was quite naive as a person. I think that was incredibly helpful from an optimism point of view because I had lots of energy and I was really positive, but I also don't think I was very worldly at all. And I think going through quite a lot of significant losses and some tough times and some despairing times was actually really helpful for me to grow up. But I reckon I've learnt more in the last 20 years than I learned in the rest of my life.
I think we all do. I think when maturity and wisdom kicks in, I think we start to then realise that some of the stuff that we did in the past may have been foolish and a bit stupid, but we learn from those things. So I want to ask you, were you, because at school, I'm staying on school because I just
conceptual, slow.
I just love that. But at school, you can fit into a group. You're either part of the cricket group, the football group, the popular boys group. Did you go to an all-boys school or was it a co-ed?
Yeah, it's a great story. I went to Kenmore State School with my sisters were 2 years above and then 4 years above, and I had a great time at school and played a bit of tennis and played soccer and did all the usual sort of stuff. And then because my dad was a senior physics master at Grammar, I got the opportunity to go to Grammar, I think, for 30% of the fees. So we could actually afford it, which we never, probably as the average middle class family with one income, we didn't think we could. So I went to Grammar and really good school, made some good friends, had a couple of years there, and then my dear old dad, incredibly futuristic, says, we don't want to get comfortable, so every 10 years I'm going to take the family and I'm going to take them overseas and I'm going to plonk them down in a different country and you're going to go to school there. So I went from probably being the poorest attendee at Grammar with the 30% fees, and this privileged, in fact, overprivileged school in many ways. I've got some concerns about it. I've nothing wrong with it, but they did some amazing things, and we went to Scotland, and so I got on the plane end of grade 9 with thongs and shorts. Arrived in London, the tarmac was -3 degrees. Yeah. Pretty sure I swore a number of times. And then flew up to Dundee in Scotland. Tough industrial town, lots of gangs. I was 14 at the time, and the first day I was in the line and, hey mate, actually I don't say mate in Scotland. Yeah.
What did they say?
I can't remember. They called me Skippy actually, but they said, do you have anywhere under your house where you can store 4 wheels? And I went, where'd you get those from? Oh, from a car last night. Yeah. So that was the sort of town it was. But it was extraordinary adventure. And I really admired my parents' spirit, both my dad for initiating it and my mum that would drag, the kids along. My middle sister stayed in Brisbane and boarded at CWA or whatever. And we went over there and went to school, but from a cultural point of view, from a world view, it was a huge change in my life. And then by the end of school, so we finished school sort of July, jumped in the car. We had 5 months to travel around in a 1968 Hillman station wagon around Europe on $10 a day. Yeah. And, I'd go into the Louvre and the guards would be chasing me out of the gallery at 6 p.m. at night because I just was, wow, this is gobsmacking.
This is mad. Amazing.
Yeah, so it was quite an extraordinary education, not just at school, but also just from the travel and where we lived. And we tried to continue that a bit with our kids by, taking them travelling and getting to see the world and opening up their minds as well.
And sport? Were you a sporting person?
Yeah, I was. Josh once said to me, geez, I bet you're a better rugby player than me. He was in the first. I was like an F player. I was so bad.
Yeah, it shows.
I was so bad. And after I broke my nose, I think in one of the malls, I went, nah, this isn't for me, But I was pretty good at tennis. I was okay at tennis, comparatively. So I played tennis all through my schooling life. I played soccer when I was young, but really stuck to tennis and a little bit of running and so forth. But mainly a tennis player at school. But I loved that, and I loved the team stuff even more. I love the doubles more than the singles, even though we played both in school fixtures and stuff. It was.
Oh, sorry, we're still talking about tennis, aren't we?
Yeah.
The doubles, right?
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah. That was
Let's get out of school now.
Yep.
You left school.
Yep.
And did you go straight to uni?
I did. I left school. One of the interesting things about that was that I was one of those kids that grinded away at my schoolwork. Did okay, I ended up doing all right and got some opportunities at uni, but I had no clue what I wanted to do. I never thought I want to be a fireman or a doctor or whatever. So my dad, in his wisdom, said, "Hey son, if you don't know what you want to do, just do a Bachelor of Business, it's broad enough." So I went to, in those days, QIT, did a 3-year degree, which in my way of thinking is the rites of passage. It's one of the things we've lost these days in the sense it gave you some time to grow into your adult skin and be a bit adventurous and stupid, but also to get a qualification. So I'm very grateful to both my parents for steering me in that right direction, but also putting up with my mischief over university years while I stayed at home with them.
And then you became an insurance salesman.
No, not a salesman, but I did. It was in.
I just want to say that.
Yeah.
I want to see you knocking on doors with a clipboard.
I'd be
in
so
your suit.
bad. I'd
You'd
be
good.
such a shit salesman.
No, you wouldn't. You'd be great.
I've run a business for like more than 26 years, and I reckon I'm the worst salesman. I just love having conversations with people about normal stuff, but I did, in those days you went out and there was lots of graduate programs, you're offered 3 jobs. I took the one that paid the most. It was very exciting. They had a graduate program. I loved it, really engaged with it. And then, a couple of years after I was there, so we're talking about, 1984 is when I started. A couple of years after I was there, one of the assistant managers came up to me and said, "Hey mate, I reckon you'd be a good consultant, to where you go around and talk to the reps and you get a car." And that's all I heard. I went, car? Really? And so I took the job, but I loved it. I loved that interaction. There was a bit of coaching, there was some presentation stuff, and then later on, quite a few years down the track, went into some management roles before I left that.
Okay. So now let's get to the point where you've joined somewhere along the line. You're an employee of the Australian Institute of Management, an employee?
Indeed, I was an employee.
I didn't know they employed people. So you're on like $1.80 an hour.
Yeah, so I'd left this insurance financial company, and they had a great system. I really loved AIM. It was kind of, in those days, it was a real family sort of culture. I got to know each other really well. I came in and there was a great mentoring program. So Rick Davis was the guy that was in my office, and I attended his workshops, and there was kind of a bit of a white lie there, because I went for the interview and they said, "So you do some training." In those days, I probably did 2 or 3 hours a month, and they go, "So you do what, 3 or 4 days, facilitation training?" Yeah, about that. I didn't say that was 3 or 4 days a year, but But I got the job, which was great. Rick gave me some great mentoring. I learnt so much. I was just like a sponge. I just soaked it up. I ended up, facilitating maybe 15 different workshops of various descriptions. And that's where life began professionally for me, because I just found that real sweet spot where I really love to engage with people and have conversations and facilitate. But in those days, it was all pretty scripted. You know what it was like is, here's the leader's guide and here are your resources and this is when you put your video on. It's only when you grow into your own skin, I guess, and get confidence that you can kind of let that go and be more process oriented and enjoy the conversation.
Did you play all those John Cleese videos?
Yeah.
You did?
And it got embarrassing because sometimes they were like, 145 years old.
Yeah.
They were set in 1810.
Yeah.
And it was a bit awkward, really, because...
and I think the resources back then, we only had, had John Cleese or some American video.
Yeah.
The courage to coach or something.
And they were funny. They were good and they were okay and they were good talking points. But yeah, it was... I tell you what, I'd learnt more in terms of skills in that 2.5 years that I had at the Australian Institute of Management than any other role. It was just incredible exposure.
So mate, at what age or at what time did you decide to join Lifeline?
Good question. So by the time, early 90s...
you're at AIM now.
I'm at AIM. But I was going through some real tough stuff. So a mate of mine died by suicide. The mate died of leukemia. I had a marriage that was falling apart. And when I did get divorced, and with that comes a complete sense of failure and loss of identity. Who am I, and all of that. And I know it sounds a bit strange, but that was the first time I had really found life a bit tough. And typically for me, drinking, smoking lots of pot and so forth at the time, and just trying to run and hide and fight and so forth. But slowly I started getting a better sense of self and so forth. But at that stage, when I finished, when my marriage was finished and I was starting out again, I thought, you know what, I really want to be able to help other people that have gone through some of this stuff, some of this trauma stuff. So that's when I went to Lifeline, and very much what Neil said earlier this morning, that I went in wanting to help others, but I just gained so much insight into myself and my triggers and my hang-ups and so forth, and stayed with them for 20 years, which was great. It was a real privilege to be able to, when people say that, and I know it sounds really wanky, but
cliche,
cliched, but when people say, what was it like? Honestly, it's such a privilege when someone invites you into their home, via telephone, obviously, when they're in a really tough moment of their life. It was extraordinary. And in a way, with my dad being my role model, community service was in my blood. I'd been in Rotary, I think, for 8 years, and vocational director and community director, and loved doing the fetes and the fundraising. So I love that sort of stuff. I always enjoyed some level of service, but gee, it was the thing I loved most about Lifeline, as opposed to other service roles, was it was just you and the other person. There wasn't anything getting in the way. It was just you and the other person, and it was about sitting with them and working through. And that was incredibly helpful for me to be a better father, to be a better husband, to be a better listener, and to be able to sit with people and not try and fix and solve and rescue.
And also to be a great mate too. And I've got first-hand experience of that. But I want to ask you, because it does intrigue me, you mentioned earlier that, there was a time of your life when you had your practice marriage, and then, your best mate, you said, committed suicide in front of you.
Yeah, he was a good mate. I played squash with him each week, and I won't go into too many specifics, but I was, just so I don't trigger anybody that's watching this, but I was called out to where he was, and unfortunately he died, and funnily enough, not that funny really, but I'd had a team member that died by suicide in my management role, sort of maybe a year or two before that. So I was really experiencing that, and the worst part about it is I didn't have a clue what I was experiencing. So there was a police counsellor that came out to my home, bearing in mind that, you know, I was in a relatively unsupported relationship at that time. I'm pretty sure my wife at the time was shagging someone from work for at least a year. So you kind of get the notion of unsupported. And I didn't know what I was experiencing, but this police counsellor was fantastic in terms of taking me through some of the stages of loss and grief, the Kubler-Ross stuff, you know, about denial and about the idea of floating on air, if you like, and not being really attached. And then getting into, you know, the resistance stuff, the anger, the blame, the frustration, and then slowly moving through that. That was incredibly helpful for me because I could put a label on it because I thought I was going mad. But the worst thing was that I had 5 days of facilitation the week after, which was way too much anyway. But it was at the time where you're learning. So I think I had to train the trainer, and then I had on-the-job instructional techniques or whatever. And, you know, I was having these, I was facilitating and I was having these flashbacks to the moment it happened. So it was the start of understanding a little bit for me about what post-traumatic stress looked like. You know, my kids have experienced, my wife's experienced it, I've experienced it with Marcus, but at the time I didn't realise what was happening. And, you know, what I typically did as a bloke was going, no, I'm okay with this, I'm good, I'm strong and
tough.
You know, tough and self-reliant. So I met a guy that was a Vietnam vet counsellor that was in a workshop, and I actually went and made an appointment with him. And then I reckon a couple of days before it, I went, no, I don't need that anymore, I'll be okay. But I still had a bit of PTSD that was lingered. Fortunately, it sort of worked its way out, and I was able to sleep a bit better. But it was just a tumultuous time. It was a really tough time in your life. But the thing is, you tend to learn a lot more about yourself in the tough times than the good times, don't you?
Did you go through highs and lows? Like, I mean, it must shape you as a person.
I went through a lot of highs when I was smoking joints, I'd say.
No, but seriously,
seriously.
After, I want to get to the joint smoking in a minute.
Yeah.
Do you have one there?
No.
But I want to get to the joint smoking because did you do that after your mate had suicide, or were you already doing just casually?
No, pretty. I was pretty cash with that sort of stuff. It was really when I got divorced. And I was on my own, and I was living with a mate's sister, and then living on my own or whatever that I got into. And you know, take it or leave it. I never had an over-reliance on alcohol. I definitely had an over-reliance on pot, but I think it was situational because even now, take it or leave it. You know, it's not something that is wired into my DNA, but certainly at the time it was just, you know, looking back, it was just an escape, wasn't it? It was just about, I just want some time out from all this overthinking and the guilt and the shame and all the shit that you go through when you go through loss, you know?
We were just about to talk about some highs and lows. Do you trigger easy?
I trigger so easy. When I talk to the blokes and we talk about emotional intelligence, I go, self-regulation, please don't rely on me as a role model. So I had even that situation, but I ignite, and not violently or what have you, but I ignite. I get really cross or frustrated
with yourself,
with myself, and then I de-escalate very quickly. So I do, and one of the things that I have noticed is that the more I do focused attention stuff, so the more I'm in nature or exercising or meditating, the more I'm responsive rather than reactive. So I agree with that notion that when it comes to the neural pathways, you've got to exercise those things so that you become more responsive. But even this morning, I can't remember the last time I got really cross, and it was a family situation where I felt that a member of the family was being totally unsupportive in a situation, and I got really mad. But I know what my triggers are. In this case, it was an over-reliance on my wife having to change her plans to do stuff. And I also recognise that you know, I'm coming to Brisbane this day and I can't change these plans, and the frustration of that tension of wanting to serve my mum, but also to be able to do this. So yeah, I still have that, but that's a lot rarer these days than it was maybe going back, you know, 30 years ago.
It's interesting when you say you de-escalate really quickly. Is there something that you do? Do you talk to yourself in your head and go, she'll be right, mate, just get over it. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, one thing I've learnt to do is to not marinate in it. So I really...
that's a good word, marinate.
Yeah, like just not marinate in the negativity. I get frustrated, and I've always been that way, funnily enough. There's a bit of nature there. But I let it go quickly, and I don't let it, if I can, unless I've blurted something out and sworn a whole lot, I don't let it affect those long-term relationships. So one of the reasons for that is just a beautiful saying from Gary McDonald, you know, the mother and son, Norman Gunston comedian. Yeah. He was interviewed once, and the interviewer was saying, gee, you know, Gary, you're doing really well. What do you put that down to? You know, you lowered your anxiety, your depression, you seem to be in a good place. And he said, I finally learnt that I have that ability to intercept and interrogate my thoughts.
Wow.
So intercept, notice the storyline, you know, notice it, watch it, you know, and then interrogate it going, hold on, is there any evidence for that? Is it really as bad as that? In 5 years' time, will I be thinking about that? Am I talking about an inconvenience, or am I talking about a problem? And that's helped me just to be a little bit wiser as I've got older. And I mean a little bit, fractionally. Certainly, I'm not going to write a book on emotional intelligence because the chapter on self-regulation would be missing. But I do like the fact that I can get frustrated and then I can quickly regroup and not damage myself or others.
So you trigger yourself more than what other people trigger. So let me give you an example. I think about a month and a half ago, I came up and we did a Marcus mission, and I was going to do some filming, and I left my batteries behind, and I had to then travel the hour back. Did that trigger you to go, Gerald, how hard is it to bring batteries in you?
Not at all. Mate, it's funny you said that, because I actually quite the opposite. I felt, oh my goodness, here's a mate of mine that's driven up the coast to do this work for me, and he's
incompetent.
No. He is dedicated enough to drive an hour and a half home and an hour and a half back just so he can film this. I was absolutely grateful for what you were doing, and and if anything, I felt kind of almost a bit of, what do they call that, vicarious guilt? You know,
vicarious guilt. You felt guilty for me.
Yeah, I felt, oh my goodness, you know, I can't believe that
you've got
to do this. You know, that you've got to go back and do this. So yeah, that.
But there must be a part of your brain that says, "You fucking idiot." No, there must be, because that's what I would just go, how useless are you? Because remember, I called you up the night before, and I said the night before, I said to you, mate, I've packed everything. Everything's ready to go. It's standing at the front door. Everything's going to be fine. I'll be there early, because I was coming the night before, and I stayed over, and we had some dinner and warm beer. That was beautiful. I love that part. We didn't have any beers, did we?
No, red wine.
No, red wine. But at that stage, you must have been thinking, everything's just perfect here. And you know, when I then finally turn up and you plug everything in, and that cold rush that comes through you,
I hate that.
When you just go, no, it's got to be in the other bag. And you know it's not. It's not there.
It's like when you've facilitated a whole day of presentations and you realise your fly's undone. It's a really awkward moment,
You've never
isn't
done
it?
that. No. That's just a
but,
nice story.
I've dreamt of it. But I have to say, one of the things that it's been really helpful, which is my mantra for life. I'm going to be cremated, but if I had a tombstone, it'd say, have faith in the process, forget about the outcome. You know, so just have faith in the process of engaging. Have faith in dealing with that, and try not to catastrophize. And if you ask examples of my family, I'm shocking with that sometimes. Like, we arrived in New York and we got this family holiday, and I'm really excited. We're in this car park where the Airbnb's meant to be, and this guy's ripped us off, so we've got nowhere to go. And that was a moment of trigger stress. And I'm pretty sure, you know, my family who were handling it, you know, with great calmness and so forth, I'm the one that's going, oh my God, what am I doing? And jeez, I can't believe this. That was a trigger for me. But then when I went back to it, and I'm pretty sure, it was a bit of an introduction to this for the non-family, direct family members, where they're going, what's this guy on? What's happening for him? But for me, that was major, because if I think about myself as a provider and a protector, we're sitting in the freezing cold in the middle of this car park, and I've booked us this super expensive Airbnb, which actually doesn't exist. Yeah. So I felt huge amount of over responsibility, and that's where I'm my worst enemy, where I take too much responsibility for situations without coming back and quickly going back into the mode of, right, what steps are we going to take? So I'm getting better at it, but it takes me a while, and I must admit I still have those really emotionally immature moments where I have a bit of a meltdown, and then I regroup and go, whew, okay.
It's interesting, in our line of work, we normally get asked, what we tend to do is that we ask the question, what is it that you want to learn today? And most people say, I just want to understand everyone else's personality. If I can understand that person's personality, I might be able to connect with them. Do you have a personality disorder?
Yeah, look, I think I've got, I'll just grab this glass of water while I answer. This is called giving myself time. Several personality disorders.
Oh, serious?
Yeah.
So
I'm sure I have.
No. Call you Sybil from now on?
Yeah, I find this really interesting when people talk about disorders, because one of the things with Marcus Mission is we really don't try and label anything too much. We really try and make sure that we just go, okay, there we are. Because there's this continuum, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where you talk about highly dysfunctional right the way to not so dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And I reckon certainly over responsibility is part of that. Absolutely, that's part of what I do. But I think one of the things I've learnt this late in life again, is that notion of understanding each other's mental maps and turning towards that person, trying to do things that acknowledge their mental maps and serve their mental maps, rather than resisting it. And the same with me, understanding my own stuff and trying to modify it, but also having a beautiful partner like Simone that is understanding and generally speaking, we have our moments, but generally speaking acknowledges the overdeveloped weird stuff and can work around that. So part of that for me is that, rather than obsessing just over my own stuff, is being able to sort of try and understand other people, or try and understand myself and make adjustments to it. So, for instance, simplest example that I often give in workshops, particularly the Marcus Mission stuff, is when we're talking about knowing others. What are their mental maps? What are their likes, dislikes? What are their motivations? Are they more introverted or more extroverted? Are they more big picture or detailed? And how do I adjust my approach to suit that? So with Simone, one thing I do know is that, and we had this situation just on Sunday night, we had some people that are staying with us and their parents came over for dinner. And so I know she loves matching everything. So in other words, she went through the kitchen cupboards at one stage, and anything that wasn't matching or didn't have a full set, it went to Lifeline. No, I had no input, by the way, on any of that. No. So, but I know that when I set the table, I've got to have matching knives and forks for all 6 of us. Yeah. Matching glasses. I've got to make sure that it works well. Do I do that? No. I'm a bloke. I could not give a shit about what knife I use, or well, it is sexist, but I reckon it is something where, actually, it is sexist.
It is, but it's ingrained in us, isn't it? It's in our DNA.
Who cares, really? But I do that because I know Simone will come out and she'll walk past and go, "Thank you, that's lovely," or that you get in and help. And I must admit, one thing that we have, which is slightly off topic, one thing we have in our relationship is we don't have a great delineation of roles. We both parent actively.
That's good.
We both spend time with our kids actively. We both, cook meals. we both, Sim will blow down the drive, I'll do some weeding. So we're both outdoors, indoors, whatever. And I do love that idea that, you understand each other's mental maps, you make those adjustments rather than judge. It's more about discovery rather than judgment, trying to understand how does this person tick and how can I honour their mental map rather than grind my teeth and find frustration with it.
It's interesting, we've been talking a little bit about Marcus' mission. You mentioned it a few times. Who's Marcus?
So Marcus was my elder sister and her husband, Anya Mark's youngest, who died by suicide about 8 years ago. And, had quite a few of the typical socio-situational factors that possibly lead to suicide ideation. So, things like, he was living away in Canada, didn't really have any great supportive friends there at the time. They were all pretty apathetic. He broke up with his girlfriend. She was, disgustingly mean to him. He hurt himself. He got depressed. He stayed in his room for 6 months, and that was the start of something which unfolded. Yeah. He regrouped. He came back, and we looked like he was regathering himself and so forth. But unfortunately, he died in the end. And the thing that we were thinking about, there's a certain amount of shame and guilt that comes from being a custodian, because he was living with us at the time, and he was in a job that Sim had helped him to get. He making a new circle of friends. We thought I'd climbed the mountain with him, 2 days before. So we thought he was doing well. But the trouble with males, particularly, not just young males, older males too, is that we love that idea of being strong and silent and stoic and self-reliant. We don't want to be a burden. So he'd unfortunately gone off his medication. We didn't realise it at the time. We thought he was still taking it, and he did die by suicide. And it was the worst experience I've ever had in my life, for not just for me, but for my family, because both our kids were affected by it, had some level of PTSD. Simone was the same, and there's all the guilt and replay about how could we avoided it. What came out of it? So we run a workshop, Finding Meaning Through Loss and Change. And the meaning we found through this loss was, hold on, being a crisis counsellor, we're in touch with Marcus. What have we missed? If we step back from the personal example, and this took a few years for us to get to this place, so it was certainly a lot of really messy stuff in the meantime for all of us, was the meaning that came from that is, what social support structure do we need that would help men, young, old, whatever, to be able to feel supported, to move through and navigate life's challenges, and not let it slide into that acute stage of strong suicide ideation and planning and blah, blah, blah. So we wanted to go upstream, and having been at Lifeline for so long, we didn't want to deal with the crisis stuff. We wanted, how do we go upstream? And as Desmond Tutu says, stop pulling men out of the river, find out while they're falling in the river to begin with. So what we found in that early research was that there was all these socio-situational factors that trigger ideation for men. And, not generalising a bit here, but things like, separation and breakups, relationship breakups, custody issue, financial issue, health issues. Big one is conflict within the family, conflict outside the family, financial, etc. All of those things contribute. Now, in Marcus's case, there was quite a few of those things ticked off. So if we could have, and coulda, shoulda, woulda, you can't change anything. But if we were in Canada at the time when that happened and we could put some support around it, what would it look like? First thing we realised is in some cases the family is desperate to help, but they're too close to the action. And that was the case with uncle and auntie and cousins. And whilst we can provide love and a sense of belonging and really connect with him and so forth, it wasn't enough. So one of the things that we found was that if we could provide social support where we could get men together and they could have a sense of belonging for being part of a group, And because of my background as a facilitator, skill development, so knowing yourself, trying to understand yourself and understanding the distorted thinking stuff and knowing others and relationship skills and dealing with conflict better and optimism and well-being and dealing with loss. If we could structure a program where we could skill up the guys for dealing with it and have real conversations about that stuff, and then help the community with some suicide prevention strategies, so run suicide prevention programs, but also have everyday blokes outside the family that can be mentors, that can spend an hour or two with these guys every week and just, be a bit of an ear and clarify stuff and be supportive of them. Wow, that might work. And so the more research we did, the more excited we got about that. So we approached one of my oldest commercial clients, Wesley Mission Queensland, because they're super innovative, extraordinary organisation, and said, hey, this is what's happened. This is what we're thinking of setting up as a program, suicide prevention program for men. What do you reckon? And sure enough, typical of Wesley Mission Queensland, yeah, let's give it a go. So we went through all the governance stuff, and originally we had a house in Brisbane and we were going to have a drop-in house where people could come in, but with council regulations and protocols and stuff, you can't get that off the ground.
It got too hard.
It's too hard. So we said, how do we change the model? So we had these great people working with Wesley about, do we make it a more community-based model? So that started sort of, if you like, less than 4 years ago. We were still mapping out the model, and I think November 2018 or somewhere like that, we did our first trial runs of workshops, and we started to do, and we've learned a lot from there. We've adapted, but the exciting thing is when you hope for a lot and you expect nothing, is we've got 10 regions in Queensland, including one in Cherbourg, which is run by Aboriginal men for their own mob, where the social workers, support workers that are involved in that. So it's incredibly exciting that we're up to 10, and the model's really worked, and we know that. We know that there's men that wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the program, and that's the really exciting part. But I have to say, I feel completely blessed that, I had, someone like Wesley who said, yep, let's give this a go. We had this extraordinary guy called Glenn Walwork, who had finished his, I didn't even know there was such a thing, a master's in suicidology, and I had run leadership workshops, and Glenn was a participant 10 years before at Wesley. And he was in this prime sort of position. He'd run some great programs for Wesley in the past and came in and coordinated the program. So, we'll feel incredible sense of gratitude and happiness that it's developed well. And it's plugging those gaps that I think men haven't had in the past. They haven't had that sort of support. And men suicide prevention strategies have got to be very different to women because we're different in terms of our makeup and our DNA and our thinking. And the more traditionally anchored we are to those values of, those masculine values of being strong and silent and stoic and self-reliant, which are great things in certain situations, the more we're inflexible with those values, the tougher it is for us to seek support. So we've established a program where, super informal and fun and light, but absolutely real, totally authentic, and we share a lot of real stuff together. And some blokes come into the program. We had a friend of one of our mentors in there the other day and said, geez, I've never ever seen this much disclosure in a group ever in my whole life. And he's in his 60s. I just didn't think men spoke like this. So there's this myth about men don't communicate. Well, actually do if you provide an environment which is real, non-judgmental, informal, and activity-driven. We throw around a footy as you've seen, when we start having
or
a chat.
Frisbee, or just head down to the beach and just even throw sand at each other, whatever it is. But I love the activity base. So Marcus was 18 when he took his life, and is this
23?
Oh, sorry, I'm 23. But from the Marcus mission is aimed at what age group though?
So we started with a bracket where the number one cause of death for men between 18 and 45 or 44 is death by suicide. So we targeted that, and then when we started the program, we found that there was lots of blokes that wanted to be in the program, that had time and wisdom and would be amazing mentors, but also needed to be supported. So, after I think a year or so, we just went, it's 18 plus. We don't deal with younger issues. It's really key strategic thing. Stick to the focus, stick to the sweet spot. We're there, suicide prevention, going upstream, educating, helping, supporting, but it's for men. And whilst there's some incredible women, including my sister Andre, and Simone, who was the co-founder of Marcus Mission, and Mel, who's a helper on the sunny coast, and there's a lot of great women behind the scenes that support this. But for the program to be authentic, it has to be men for men, and having those sort of discussions.
Because there will be some women who will watch this and just go, this sounds like the perfect group for me. I don't like the airs and graces. I don't like the person who sits back and wants to have the old soft talk and here, have a jelly bean. Hopefully this will help you. I'm patronising here. But there might be some women that would say, this would be the perfect group for me. Like, I want this. What would you say to that person? Would you just go, look, this is a men's group for men's. We're not being sexist at all. We're not like, I know there are some men's group that are now inviting women in, and it changes the dynamic. It really shifts the dynamics of what you're trying to achieve. What would you say?
Well, very much that. It shifts the dynamics. We're successful because of the fact that men feel that they can blurt out anything and there's no worry about that, no concern about that. I think it'd be wonderful, and there are some incredible women's groups around this area. One of the things we've got to recognise is women are more emotionally intelligent than men.
Yeah.
So they've got this ability to actually go to girlfriends or friends or whatever, sit down and blurt it out and talk through shit and open themselves up and do that. This is not a natural thing for men. So we've got to create an environment which allows men to do that. And men for men is the environment that we create. So I go for it. If we've got people that are establishing women's groups, that's absolutely fantastic. And mixed groups, doesn't matter. But for our particular program, the model works really well, and there's some integrity around the model. And we've had the odd thing where we think that it's a bloke turning up, when we're registered for workshops, but it's actually a woman. And it's interesting when you observe that we don't say, out of here, but they've sat in on the group and the dynamic is completely different. So it shifts things around. So we've had that experience too, where it hasn't necessarily worked as effectively.
Do you think that's because maybe, if we go back to caveman days, is it men did that, the hunting, the gathering, the tribalism that we had, that was our reptilian brain that was kind of like, we did all the blokey bloke things. Yeah. And traditionally, again, not to be sexist, but traditionally the women were there, they were the nurturers, the carers. Do you think that is what we like more? We like to be in that group, that tribe where we can, chew the cigar, spit it out, and not have to worry about, oh, sorry, I just spat on an area I shouldn't have spat. Is that what it is? Yeah, well,
I think there's a couple of things here. I think that one of the things that we do know is that men need other men to be able to connect with. We'd need that. I know John McDonald, who was a professor, I think, from Newcastle Uni and established Men's Shed and so forth. And when he was asked in Mental Health Week a couple of years back, actually, Mental Health Week this week, Men's Mental Health Week, what's one thing you'd like every bloke in Australia to have that would help with their mental health? 3 great mates that you could talk to. So, this notion of creating an environment where blokes can talk to blokes is fantastic. And it's at a friendship level, and it's at a disclosure level, a vulnerability level. But actually creating vulnerability for men is a tricky situation because it takes a hell of a lot of courage. And so one of the things that's most liberating for me is when blokes speak up in a group or one-on-one with someone else and they talk through some of the stuff. That's where we've ticked the box. But I reckon, it's any good marriage is not just about interdependence and this love that you have for, you know, your partner, but it's also about independence, having a life outside that. So I love the fact that Simone, for instance, has got some great girlfriends that she catches up with and has coffee with and goes for walks and goes to the gym with and chats. She's more of a doer and chat too. She likes the shoulder-to-shoulder model. She just can't stand just sitting down and having a cup of coffee. But so it's a wonderful thing for her. Similarly, it's a wonderful thing for me to be connected to mates and men's group as well, but still to be able to come together. And I've got some, you know, incredible female friends who, you know, I absolutely adore. But it doesn't necessarily change the fact that it's great to have some mates, some men that you can chat with.
I don't know how I'm going to frame this question correctly, but I'm just going to put it to you because I know you'll take it the way it is. So this isn't what you signed up for, Marcus Mission. This wasn't something that you had planned many years ago as a child. That this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a person that's going to be running men's workshops. It's not what it's not what I'm built to do. But through the crisis became opportunity. And how long did it take before you thought, wow, I need to go through my grieving process, you know, using the Kubler model.
Kubler-Ross, yeah.
Kubler-Ross model. And you thought, now's the time, now is right. So how long did that period take from when Marcus took his life to when you started?
Yeah, good thought.
Mission?
So maybe if we went like 4 years, so yeah, it certainly took a few years to get that going, and there was a few catalyst moments. So the first thing I'd say is that whenever I've lost someone that I've been close to, I need to be able to claim memories of them, good memories and so forth, so that I can go forward and kind of channel them in the way I live.
Yeah.
So for instance, Milt, who's one of my great mates, and I'm sure Sarah wouldn't mind me saying this, I remember being at his house one time and them having a little tiff, a little argument, and he just turns around to me and goes, rubber bullets, mate, rubber bullets, you know. And just some of those little things that you hear and, you know, that you relate to with mates, and his level of optimism and just go out and make life happen. Extraordinary learning. So I like to think that every person I've lost, I take a little bit of them with me and kind of honour their memory through you know, tuning into that. But I guess for me, one of the things that happened is I started in 2010, which was a couple of years before Marcus's passing. I went to Africa with a mate, and I went back every 2 years for a month, and we were doing lots of community development work with some great organisations over there. An organisation, people want to look at it, called Niambani, which is essentially looks after HIV orphans. And when we were finishing up, you know, our service there, or getting close to it, or this was our last trip, you know, we were saying, what do you reckon we should be doing with all this? And you know, James was saying, you know, that when men present to hospital, that they've got an extraordinary chance of actually dying by suicide as a result, because they come into a hospital system sometimes, not always, but sometimes where they're treated like, this is a burden and here we go again, and people almost offering contempt, you know, for the fact that they're there. So they might go out. So we were talking about, wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of work that we could do together around supporting men when they're coming out of a hospital system and blah, 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 blah. And then when this happened to Marcus, we already had that idea. You know, wow, maybe this could be Marcus House. Maybe this could be Marcus Mission. And James, you know, went into a psych practice and, you know, got stuck into that. But I have to say, the first fundraiser that we were ever at, James was my mate who was doing the 42K, you know, walk across the mountains to raise money. So he was there for that, and was an amazing catalyst in terms of that idea. So there was some loose idea about looking after men hanging around.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Cooperoo as the house that we had as that. But we ended up selling that, and then the money that we would get from that became a fund that would provide our financial contribution to Marcus Mission, because we wanted to have a skin in the game.
So you get no funding?
Beg your pardon?
You don't get no government funding?
Very little. We've got the odd grant here and
Yeah.
there, but the program might, let's say it costs you roughly with the back end work. We've only got like 1.5 paid employees. So we've got Glenn and we've got Gary in head office, and so there's their salaries. It's almost nothing else that we spend money on, So we spend money on rooms and catering and but we've got hundreds of volunteers that just volunteer their time and all the rest of it. But one of the things that we found was that we really wanted to demonstrate to them that we're serious about this. So we didn't want to just offer our time, which is significant. I probably spend a third of my week on Marcus Mission related stuff. But we wanted to put some money in, so we put the skin in the game. So we sold the house, and instead of that being Marcus House, the fund, if you like, would provide an annual amount where we could present that to Wesley and say, we've got a starting point. Because I think, probably 180,000 is probably around where we are per year. Wesley put their hand in the pocket generously every year. We've got some great people, a few sponsors here and there. We get a few grants to start some programs. I think Somerset was sponsored. I think Cherbourg was sponsored for the first year to set it sort of up. But we're always sort of thinking, how are we going to meet that? And my goal really is we can either get enough grants or enough private sponsorship, which is tax deductible, so that Wesley don't have to fund a program that they get no financial gain from. Because they've been absolutely marvellous in continuing to fund this as a missionary project.
Yeah. And what's the symbolism of the hands?
So this
interlocking arms?
This particular symbol was actually a photograph, believe it or not, that Marcus took, because he was a great photographer, great musician, sportsman. That's a tragic part of this, isn't it? That people that die by suicides, they can't see the love that other people have for them and the strengths that they have. They just feel like a burden. But coming back to this was a photograph he took, and when we were going through his photographs and we were looking at photographs for articles and so forth, we went, oh my goodness, this symbolises what Marcus Mission is about. And one of our mentors recently said, just in a workshop the other day, said, wow, I love the symbolism of that, because Marcus Mission is about all of us being on the mountain and someone grabbing your hand and helping you up while you're grabbing the hand of someone else and helping them up. It's a peer mentoring network. So we're helping each other. We're not, nobody's in a better position than others. We're helping each other, and it's pretty good symbolism, isn't it?
I love it, because it does actually show one person giving a hand to another person. And again, it can be that cliche, but what I love about it is that that's his photo. It's not a reproduction where you've gone into an art house and said, look, we want you to recreate this. That is that sticks in your head every time you put that shirt on. Yeah,
and it makes me, every time I do, makes me feel proud, that we've done something to help Marcus. Getting a little emotional.
Yeah. Mate, I want to have this conversation again.
Great.
Not the same conversation, but I want to have a different one with a whiskey next time. Are you up for that? And we can maybe, what?
Absolutely. Ginger beer, ginger ale.
Can we just
I hate whiskey, but yeah. But
you hate whiskey?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to say that. Beer?
Get out. No, you have to leave now. Can we just scrap everything that we spoke about? I did not know that. You don't like whiskey. I'm going to teach you how to drink whiskey. And I'm also going to teach you how to wash a shirt.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, sorry about the stains.
Yeah, it's okay.
Everybody
what happened
seen?
There?
Don't know. I think it was, I do cook for Marcus Mission Sunny Coast. For every workshop we do, I feed them breakfast and feed them lunch, and I reckon there's a fair bit of savoury mince that has sort of landed on this shirt.
I love it how you go that below the line, the blame, excuses, denial sort of stuff.
Hey, no,
I'm just taking accountability for it.
I'm cooking, man. I'm happy. John,
I love this conversation. I want to do it again, but I want, seriously, next time we have it with a beer or something.
Awesome.
I want to bring in some other people, so maybe we can do this live, and we can get some people, if you don't mind, get some people to be able to ask questions that they might be interested in doing it. So you can jump onto my show. Are you in? Are you in for that?
I'm in, mate.
You're in for that?
Thanks, Gerald. Really appreciate your generosity too, mate, in supporting us.
All good. Thanks, mate.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.